Hello everyone. This is the first lesson of Stylistics, and we'll begin with a brief history of Stylistics. So, Stylistics explores how readers interact with the language of mainly literary texts in order to explain how we understand and are affected by texts when we read them. So, stylistics, in other words, is a linguistic approach to literary texts. The development of stylistics, given that it combines the use of linguistic analysis with what we know about the psychological processes involved in reading, depended at least in part on the study of linguistics and psychology. Both were largely 20th century phenomena, becoming reasonably established. So this approach, and with the use, of course, of both linguistics and psychology, was established. Stylistics, then, is a sub-discipline which grew up in the second half of the 20th century. Its beginnings in Anglo-American criticism are usually traced back to the publication of the books listed below. 3 of them are collections of articles, some of which had been presented as conference papers or published in journals a little earlier. We got first Fowler Roja, published in 1966, entitled Essays on Style in Language. Second one, Freeman Donald C., 1971, entitled Linguistics and Literary Style. We got also Leach Geoffrey N., published in 1969 and entitled A Linguistic Guide to English Poetry. The last book amongst those 4 is Sibyuk Thomas A. The book was published in 1960 and was entitled Style in Language. Perhaps the most influential article is that by Roman Jakobson in Sibyuk, 1960, pages 350 to 377. It is called A Closing Statement, Linguistics and Poetics, because it was a contribution to a conference which Sibyuk published as a collection of papers. It is pretty difficult, so we wouldn't recommend nipping off to read it until you have done a bit more stylistics. But as we shall see below, Jakobson is an important figure who connects together various trends in the development of stylistics. Stylistics can be seen as a logical extension of moves within literary criticism early in the 20th century to concentrate on studying texts rather than authors. So this is an interesting point here. 19th century literary criticism concentrated on the author, and in Britain, the text-based criticism of 2 critics, I.A. Richards and William Empson, his pupil, rejected that approach in order to concentrate on the literary texts themselves and how readers were affected by those texts. This approach is often called practical criticism, and it is matched by a similar critical movement in the USA associated with Klinth, Brooks, Rini Welek, Austin Warren, and others, called New Criticism. So we got practical criticism in Britain, new criticism in the United States of America. New criticism was based almost exclusively on the description of literary works as independent aesthetic objects, but practical criticism tended to pay, this is the difference between them, tended to pay more attention to the psychological aspects involved in a reader interacting with a work. However, these two critical movements shared two important features. First, so the common things now, an emphasis on the language of the text rather than its author. And two, an assumption that what criticism needed was accounts of important works of literature based on the intuitional reading outcomes of trained and aesthetically sensitive critics. In other words, what you need someone who is an expert in literary aesthetic aspect in order to trust what he does and what he says. Not anyone can approach, in other words, a literary text. You need someone who is an expert. These critics, and of course you're gonna trust his intuition here. This is the key word here. Based on the intuitional reading outcomes of trained and aesthetically sensitive critics. So you're gonna have to trust what he says because he's got a strong intuition that results from his expertise in the field. These critics did not analyze the language of texts very much, but rather paid very close attention to the language of the texts when they read them, and then described how they understand them and were affected by them. Nearly 100 years later, this approach is still very influential in schools and universities in the Western world, and gives rise to the kind of critical essay where writers make a claim about what a text means or how it affects them, and then quote and perhaps discuss a textual sample to illustrate the view argued for. This could perhaps be called the claim and quote approach to literary text, or literary criticism, sorry. In general terms, stylisticians believe that the claim and quote strategy is inadequate in arguing for a particular view of a text, because you can't just claim something and quote. Stylisticians thought that it's not enough, because like the slip twixt cup and lip, there are often logical gaps between the claim and the quotation intended to support it. In other words, stylisticians think that intuition is not enough, and that we should analyze the text in detail and take careful account of what we know about how people read when arguing for particular views of texts. But the stylistics approach in Western Europe and North America clearly grows out of the earlier critical approaches associated with practical criticism and new criticism. Stylisticians also use the same kind of approach on non-literary texts. There is another important strand of influence in the development of stylistics, the one which Roman Jakobson was involved in, which comes from Eastern Europe. In the early years of the 20th century, the members of the formalist linguist circle in Moscow, usually called the Russian formalists, like I.A. Richards, also rejected undue concentration on the author in literary criticism in favor of an approach which favored the analysis of the language of the text in relation to psychological effects of that linguistic structure. So these critics, obviously British critics, started to favor the influence of, the text itself and its psychological influence on the reader. The group contained linguists, literary critics, and psychologists, and they and the Prague structuralists began to develop what became very influential aspects of textual study in later stylistics, called foregrounding theory. Remember this term? This is a very interesting and very important theory. Foregrounding theory. It's almost synonymous to stylistics. This view suggested that some parts of texts had more effect on readers than others in terms of interpretation, because the textual parts were linguistically deviant or spatially patterned in some way that makes thus making them psychologically salient or foregrounded for readers. Foregrounding, I mean, foregrounded, it means that it is more, if you foreground a text or you make it more apparent, more obvious, you make it stand out in relation to the rest of the sentence or the text. This is what it means, foregrounding, in short, but we'll learn more about it later. The Russian formalists were, in effect, the first stylisticians, but their work was not understood in the West because of the effects of the Russian fact of politics, the Russian Revolution in 1917. After the revolution, formalism fell out of favor. It became unpopular. And because of war and politics. And in any case, academic communication between what became the Soviet Union and Western Europe and North America virtually ceased. I mean, it ceased to exist. There was no communication whatsoever between the two poles. Roman Jakobson became one of the most influential linguists of the 20th century, and the reason for his considerable influence on stylistics, in addition to his own academic brilliance, was because he linked various schools of linguistics together. He left Moscow at the time of the Russian Revolution and moved to Prague, where he became a member of the Prague Structuralist Circle, who were also very interested in the linguistic structure of texts and how they affected readers. Then when Czechoslovakia also became, I hope I pronounced it well, also became communist, he moved to the USA, rather like beneficial virus, as it were. He carried the approach which later became called stylistics with him, and helped those who wanted to develop practical and new criticism in more precise, analytical directions. That is, Jakobson did a big job, I mean, a great service to people living, I mean, intellectuals living in the West, because he took to them from the East what they did not know before. The introduction and Chapter 2 of J. Douthwaite's 2000 to its a linguistic theory of foregrounding has a more detailed history of stylistics in the concept of foregrounding. So check it out. This concept is a cornerstone of stylistic analysis. I repeat the title: The Introduction and Chapter 2 of J. Douthwaite's 2000 towards a linguistic theory of foregrounding. Okay. So, why stylistics now? An interesting question. The term stylistics became associated with detailed linguistic criticism because at the time it developed, the study of authorial style was a major critical concern, and linguistics and linguistic analysis, allied to statistics, was popular with the more linguistically inclined critics. To some degree, it is a less happy name now, as statisticians have, by and large, moved away from the study of style and towards the study of how meanings and effects are produced by literary texts. There have been a few attempts to change the name of the enterprise, for example, to literary linguistics or critical linguistics, but none of the labels so far proposed covers all the aspects of field adequately. For example, the two just mentioned can just as easily apply to areas not covered by statistics and do not adequately represent the psychological aspects of the approach. And so stylistics has survived as the most popular label despite its shortcomings. That's about the name. Another question. Is stylistics formalist? In some modern literary criticism, formalist is often used almost as a term of abuse. Some critics accuse stylistics of being formalist and so inadequate to account for variant, so they accuse it of being inadequate to account for the variant responses of readers to texts. But is it so? Certainly, one of its historical roots is in the group called Russian formalists. It connects, absolutely, it has a relationship. It connects to formalism. And one of its founding fathers, Roman Jakobson again, tended to assume that all you had to do to account for a text was to analyze as completely as possible the details of its linguistic structure. But although, like the Russian formalists, stylisticians are concerned to describe the linguistic structure of literary texts precisely and in detail, they are also very interested in trying to understand how readers respond to that detail, as foregrounding theory, amongst others, shows. So it's more interesting than just form and so foregrounding theory, as we shall see later, is more complex and it involves lots of things. Language levels now, very interesting title, catchy one. Language levels, how to begin to apply what we know. We'll explore textual choice and linguistic levels in a number of poems and advertising slogans, just as examples now. This will help you to get hands-on sense of the relation between linguistic choice and meaning, style and effect. As a consequence, you should begin to get a sense of what full-blown stylistic analysis will be like, even though we have not yet learned enough analytical tools to do such an analysis really well. I mean, we're not yet, we haven't yet covered a big thing or a big chunk of stylistics to be able to get in depth, but as a start, we'll just try to get a sense of what it is. That, after all, is the purpose of the How Language and Style course. Although you can go through the various elements of this session in any order, we suggest that you use, of course, the ordering we are providing here. That is, in the order I am following or pursuing. We started with the short history of stylistics, and then why stylistics and the name, and is stylistics the same as formalism, and then now we're moving to language levels. How great writing happens, another nice title, genius or the careful choice of language. I mean, are authors and poets, are they genius, or they are careful choosers, as it were, of language and words and diction? Many people have an image of writing and writers, particularly poets, which assumes that they are geniuses from whom great writing flows in an almost magical and unanalyzable way. A good example of this stereotype is an advertisement which Henken, the Dutch ledger makers, put out a few years ago as part of a themed advertising campaign. Henken ran a series of ads where a person or a part of a person was lifeless but became reinvigorated when he or she concerned drank a can of Henken. The slogan "Henken refreshes the parts other beers," sorry for the term, for the word, cannot reach, was displayed. Later in the series of ads, they had one where the famous Lake District poet Wordsworth, who lived about 30 miles north of Lancaster, is trying to compose his famous poem about daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud. He's pictured sitting by the side of a lake, trying again and again to write the poem, but always failing to get started. Then he drinks a can of Henkein, which he has brought with him, and the poem just pours out of the end of his pen. You can, that is what they are trying, what the advertisement is about is that they are trying to show in almost in a caricature manner. That the poet Wordsworth got his poem out of drinking alcohol. That's a stereotype which was put or included in this advertisement. And of course, the purpose of advertisement is to sell the product more than to speak about poetry. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a house of golden daffodils, and so on. So the poet starts to pour words out of his mouth because he drank this Henkein. Of course, this is not accurate, it's just an advertisement. Levels of language again. On this topic, we explore some of the different aspects of language. These are often referred to as language levels. If we want to look carefully at language and how it works, we have to notice that there are various different aspects of language structure which need separate consideration. They are often referred to by linguists as the different levels of language. If we just think of a single sentence for the moment, we would need at least the following levels. The first level is meaning. And in meaning, example, we got lexis, that is word meaning. Example, semantics, also sentence meaning. So word meaning and sentence meaning, lexis and semantics. So I repeat, the first level of language is meaning. Example, lexis, a word meaning, and the second part of it is sentence meaning, which has to do with semantics. The second level of language is grammar, which means syntax and morphology. The third level is sounds or writing shapes, which means phonology, speech in brackets, and also graphology. That is, it has to do with shapes, writing shapes. Graphology. So three levels, we got meaning, we got grammar, we got sounds or writing shapes. In meaning, we got lexis, word meaning, and we got semantics, sentence meaning. In the second level, grammar, we got syntax and morphology. Third level, we got sounds or writing shapes, where we got phonology, which has to do with speech, and graphology, which has to do with writing or writing shapes. Now, let's move to the sounds or letters level. Phonology, we'll begin with the last one. Phonology, speech in brackets, and graphology, writing. Spoken language physically consists of distinctive speech sounds, which are called phonemes, strung together to make up words. Phonemes are sounds which distinguish one word from another. Example, bat versus pet or bit. And linguistics indicate phonemic transcriptions of speech by enclosing the transcription in slash brackets. This level of language is often called the phonemic or phonological level. So phonemes, phonological level. We got phonological from phonemes. Written English does not have sounds, although we can, to some degree, hear the sounds behind the writing in our imagination. Instead, it has a set of alphabetical symbols which we conventionally associate with the phonemes of English, sometimes in a one-to-one fashion, or sometimes in spelling combinations. For example, the two-letter combination SH is used to represent one phoneme, S, as at the beginning of the word shin, for example. The phonetic transcription, you find the phoneme or this representation with another symbol. With the symbol done included in the international phonetic alphabet. So sometimes it's a combination. So I repeat, the two-letter combination SH, which is pronounced sh, is used to represent one phoneme, sh, not s, sh. At the beginning of the word shin. So you will find the symbol of this sound sh in phonetic transcription. So sometimes it's a combination, sometimes it's just one sound, or a combination of letters or one letter. The written equivalent to the phonemic or phonological level in speech is usually called graphology. Okay, so the written form is called graphology, the written form of speech, or writing shapes. Let us look at a simple sentence to illustrate phonology and graphology. First example, girls like cats, for example. In graphological terms, substituting the letter H for the C at the beginning of the written word cats above changes the spelling from cats to hats, and its spoken equivalent would change from cats to hats. In both cases, not only would the sound or letter change, but also the whole word, and so the meaning of the sentence as a consequence. In other words, one phoneme is going to make a big difference in terms of meaning. 2, girls like hats. Girls like hats. This is the second example. At the end of the words cats and hats, there is no graphological difference between the spelling symbol and the phonemic transcription symbol used to represent the sound. But it is not difficult to find differences, and this is not surprising once you know that there are 26 letters in English, but more than 50 phonemes. This explains why the alphabet needs to use combinations of letters like SH to represent some sounds. Phonemic transcriptions, although they use equivalent alphabetical letters where they can, have to resort to other symbols in order to have a different transcription symbol for each phoneme. For example, girls has 5 letters but only 4 sounds. Girls. And although the plural at the end of each word is indicated by the letter S, the plural marker is pronounced as Z in girls and S or S in cats. See the differences? That is, although they seem alike, the ending of cats and hats seems alike, but or girls and cats, the end in terms of S, it's the same ending but different pronunciation, of course, different number of phonemes, and of course also different meanings. Now let's move to the second level of language, which is the grammatical level. A second linguistic level we can distinguish is that of grammar, by which we mean the form positioning, and grouping of the elements that go to make up sentences. Most of English grammar is controlled by the order in which words and phrases come in the sentence. This aspect of grammar is usually called syntax, and English is pretty extreme in its extensive use of syntax compared with most of the world's languages. And if you change the grammar, you also change the meaning. So note that sentence 1, we'll see what sentence 1 below, uses exactly the same words as sentence 2, but the different syntax results in radically different meanings. Example 1, girls like cats. Sentence 2, cats like girls. Same, words used in both sentences, but obviously the meaning is different. In sentence 1, girls is the subject and cats the object, and in 2, cats is the object, and in sentence 2, cats is the subject and girls the object. Grammatical relations in languages can also be controlled by adding grammar indicating elements onto the words themselves. Most of the world's languages use morphology more extensively than English to indicate grammatical relations. This is often referred to informally as adding endings to words, because although some languages put some grammatical markers at the beginning or even in the middle of words, most put them at the end. This sort of grammatical structuring is usually called morphology. Morphology accounts for the building blocks of meaning inside words. Although English is a very syntactic language, it does have some morphology. So in the above examples, the adding of the S ending indicates plural. Hence, the one-word item cats is composed of two morphemes, cat plus the S of the plural. And the first of these morphemes has 3 phonemes. Cat, that is K and A and T, 3 sounds. And the second morpheme has 1 S. Right, the meaning level, lexis, semantics, and pragmatics. In our brief look at the phonological and grammatical levels of language, we have already mentioned another linguistic level, the level of meaning. One aspect of meaning is word meaning, lexis. Changing the C or K in cats or cats to H or H changes the word and hence the meaning, in this case dramatically. The different words refer to completely different reference. But note that in lexical terms, it is also possible to change the word without changing the reference, in which case other aspects of meaning get changed. Example, the connotations and associations we have for the different words. If for example, we change cats to moggies, the reference stays the same, but the feeling connotations are much more offhand and down market. Change cat to feline. Change cat to feline quadrupeds. That is an animal that stands on 4. And you get an odd clash between the scientific connotations of the phrase and the emotional characteristics of the verb like, of which it is the grammatical object. That is, even though they are synonyms, as it were, but the context, the connotations, and the rest of it are going to make a big difference in the meaning of the sentence. Because some synonyms of the word cat, for example, are scientific terms. So when you use them and you use with them verbs like or love, I mean, you would feel some oddity and weirdness, as it were, in the use of the term in this context. When we change the syntax in sentence 1 to produce sentence 3, we also change the meaning of the sentence in dramatic fashion. This sort of sentence meaning is included in the aspect of meaning usually called semantics. The linguistic levels we have briefly explored so far explain what is needed when we consider a single decontextualized sentence. But of course, sentences don't just occur on their own. They turn up next to other sentences in texts and talk, and especially in talk, they occur within a situational context. This fact brings into play some other aspects of linguistic organization, a couple of which we need to mention here. The meaning level, again, pragmatics. So in addition to word meaning, let's remind you of these levels. We got phoneme, phonology, morpheme, morphology, and of course we got a word in a sentence. Sentence meaning changes because of the change of phonemes or change of morphemes. That is a morphology, adding an s of the plural or ed or whatever. And we got another level, which is pragmatics. What's pragmatics? So in addition to word meaning, lexis, and sentence meaning, semantics, there is another important aspect of meaning, which is usually called pragmatics. Pragmatics is the study of meaning in context. We can use the same sentence in different contexts to have very different pragmatic significances. Assume that the context is an article about the similarities and differences between boys and girls. Okay? The favorite animal for boys is the dog. Girls like cats. Here, the meaning of the second sentence is the same as in one, but additionally, it also has to be interpreted as an example of a difference between boys and girls. Now imagine a conversation between two teenage boys. So A says to B, A says, "Cats are stupid. What use is a cat?" B says, "Girls like cats." Here, the additional meaning for the second sentence will probably be something like, you could increase your chances of getting a girl to like you by saying that you like cats. Right, the meaning level again, intertextual relations. Another more general aspect of context which affects meaning is the fact that when we talk or write, we do so remembering previous texts and speech. Okay, that is when it is one aspect of language, human language, which is interchangeability, that is taking turns in a conversation. And when we take turns in a conversation, if we don't remember what we heard before, we can't speak after, we can't reply, can't answer. Thus, we can say something which we know our hearers or readers will connect to, another piece of text or readers will connect to another piece of text or talk. Imagine two people talking about whether their new cat should be called Tiddles or Toddles. After some discussion, one of them says, "What's in a name?" What's in a name? I mean, it looks like a normal question, but there is more to it. Although the sentence appears to be a question, it is really an opinion, masquerading as a question. To realize this, you need to know that it alludes to a speech in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Let's read an extract. "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called. retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. That is, whatever his name is still dear. If the speaker and the hearer know the intertextual relation, in this case a clear example of allusion, between their conversation and Juliet's, it is clear that the speaker is expressing the opinion that it doesn't really matter what name the cat has. This is because Juliet points out in her speech that she loves Romeo whatever he is called, and in her situation, where their families are at war, deciding that names don't matter has rather more force than in a conversation about the naming of cats. So, I mean, here, the conversation about deciding whether whatever the name of the cat should be, if someone says what's in name, and he knows, of course, I mean, he knows that his friend is going to understand this. He's saying that it doesn't matter, because he's alluding to Juliet's speech about Romeo's name. We will be returning to the issue of intertextuality in further lectures, hopefully. This is it for today. I hope you digested the meaning. If you don't understand something, let me know, and you have two ways to let me know. Either comments or you send me an email. Thank you.